Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Prolix Comics Bollix with myself, Nick, and himself.
Clive, and we're going to try and do this in record time if we can, 15 to 20 minutes. We are
Yes,
talking. Oh, yeah, how the fuck? How dare you do the intro? It's
I
my.
shouldn't have done the intro. You're right.
Yes,
That was
I
you.
thought it was. No, I didn't want to take the blame. So,
Oh,
yes, we're talking Plop,
hmm.
the new magazine of weird humor from DC Comics, which ran 24 issues in 1973 to 1976. I have a horrible feeling that Nick is going to say he read all of them.
No, I did get to episode. I got to about issue 18.
Oh, double me. I did 9.
Okay, all right.
Yes,
That's all right. It doesn't get better, that's for sure.
yeah, I could sense a lack of variety.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I
So
suppose
how did you come to this? Maybe just quickly explain why you chose Plop or
I
how
don't
you.
know. I suspect because I was just looking about for. I was in a bit of a. I was slightly hurried to. It
Mhm.
was my choice, and I noticed that I did have a bunch of these plops, and I think probably what led me to it was the fact that Bassett Wolverton did,
Yes.
and his covers are great. That's what
They're easily the best thing. And then the Wally Wood covers are actually not bad as well.
I didn't get to the Wally. When do the Wollywoods start?
Around issue 10, but then they become so sometimes it'll be a Wolverton, sometimes it'll be a Wally. And one of the later Wolverton ones, the one that's like Johnny Tonsils or whatever the fuck it is outrageous.
Yeah,
Because it totally looks like a guy who's got a pair of testicles kind of hanging out of his mouth.
I'm
It's
gonna carry on just looking at the covers
just
because
look at the cover. Yeah.
I do love the back. Those are definitely the best things about it. So yeah, so it's basically the main. I mean, there's a few names attached to it apart from that. Apparently, Steve Ditko, but he writes and drew some things here and there, right?
Yeah.
It's basically Sergio Aragones, the Spanish guy. Well, Spanish. He moved to Mexico as well.
Spanish Mexican, yeah.
Most famous for Mad Magazine, I guess, but almost.
No, apparently not. Most famous, according to him, for killing Marty Feldman.
Oh, that's right. Yes, yeah. And we don't have time to get into that here, but yeah,
But
yeah.
he claims this. I'm
Yeah.
not making this up.
No. You're right.
Read his Wikipedia entry. Also studied with Alejandro Jodorowsky,
Yes, he did. Yeah, mime.
mime
Right.
at the University
Yes,
of Mexico, or
but we
whatever.
won't hold that against him. The mime
Okay.
thing.
Mhm.
But also super prolific. Right? That was his thing. He was famous for just like drawing like lightning, right? And just
Yes, the editors of Mad said they literally could have given him like they could have given him all 30 pages every month and he would have been able to dash it out in a
yeah,
day.
yeah. Which kind of doesn't necessarily always lend to terrifically consistent results in the. So the thing with Plop is it has a really weak framing device. So basically, there's Cain, Abel, and Eve, right? Or 3 characters, and the framing devices they're always telling their stories to a bunch of uninterested people every month or whenever this came out, right? And Plop is, I guess, it's an existential. Like we can all go plop at any point, right? And they always have examples of things going plop, and some of them make sense, and then some of them don't. Like a plane crashing into a mountain doesn't go plop, right? But another thing, maybe like it feels very like they came up with this contrived kind of frame, and then they really shoehorn the shit into it, right? And a lot of the stories are very EC Comics, like kind of Shaggy Dog,
Yes.
Twist in the Tail stories.
In the early issues.
Comical. Yeah.
So this is where it changed. And actually,
Okay.
for me, I was almost more interested when it had a little bit more of that kind of. So, because, Mad Magazine, right, comes out of that EC, William
Yes.
Gaines thing, right? And so I really felt this was DC's attempt to kind of mash that up. It was their version of Mad Magazine in a way, bringing in this, but also bringing this kind of, EC twisted tales, kind of comedic horror stuff. So, but yeah, because it's DC, it can only go so far. Although occasionally there are like one-off gag strips where I'm like, that's surprisingly poor taste, or
every now and again,
that's a Hitler joke, or that's a woman who's herself, or something that you're like, ooh, it's
or that depressing suicidal elephant story,
right.
The dark Dumbo sequel no one wanted, right?
And I think too, if you place it in its context, like early 70s and those
Yeah,
Wolverton covers, it really looks like Zap or something like
yeah, it
that.
does.
If
It's
you had bought
clearly
it thinking it was underground, I think you would have been sorely annoyed.
it's clearly a bunch of unhip people trying to be hip, is what it is.
Hmm.
And one of the most annoying things about it is that they have these backdrops of people pissing themselves laughing, like,
Hmm.
while you, the reader, are not. So it's quite
Well,
annoying.
that's good. That really that pushes your like a laugh track button. I know, Clive, we talked about this before. You have
Yes,
a
yeah,
hard
it's a
time with
comic
laugh track.
with a laugh track, if you can
Yeah.
imagine such a thing. But no, it's really it has that same feel of, you know, there's a certain type of American comic, as in comedian,
Hmm.
that digs the Anglophile American comedian who digs like darker British comedy,
Hmm.
but doesn't understand how to do it, and then every now and again just steps over the line, and it's just
Right.
that's what Plop reminded me of. It's like
Hmm.
not funny, not funny, and every now and again, dude,
That's too much.
yeah, yeah. It's
That's
like
mean.
it doesn't understand it. There's a few bright sparks. There was one story, Oliver Partridge, the man who could fly. I quite liked that.
Hmm.
The lawn that devoured Cleveland. That was quite a good story.
Yep.
And one thing I discovered, which, to my surprise, you know, some things are automatically funny, like
Hmm.
in movies, dogs appearing to drive cars,
Yep.
hilarious, always.
Yep.
It's,
Hmm.
talking chimps, brilliant.
Yep.
You, you know, that's
Yeah.
all.
Comedy gold.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So the other thing I discovered, really, which I was genuinely surprised at, taking a existing serious superhero and making him do something out of character is actually really
Hmm.
fun. There's some of the one panel gags, like Daredevil cheating at cards, or
Right.
something like that. It's actually
Right.
quite funny. Or seeing Batman out of context,
Hmm.
you know. And you know me, I'm not exactly the biggest superhero fan, but it has to admit there's something about that that actually works. There's something quite funny about seeing stoic
Yeah.
taken out of context. So that's quite funny. But it's really spotty, isn't it? And I was wondering, you know more about comics than me.
Hmm.
I just stumbled across this, right? And it doesn't make for much of an episode. We won't be talking about it for long, but you know,
Hmm.
whatever. Now and again, we can put out a short one, right? But
Yeah.
I'm guessing from your point of view, you've probably heard of Plot before. You might have some context for it. What do people think of it? Is it considered like, in some way, is it considered, like we said, like non-hip people trying to be hip, or is it actually considered like in some way quite an important comic for some reason, or is there anything about Plot which is kind of notable or worth talking about? Take it away, Nick. No,
Thanks, Clive.
no pressure then.
Um, so I honestly I don't know. I hadn't heard of it before, but I will say, but I can maybe just a little bit set some of the bigger picture.
But just before you continue, that says something though, right? I'm
Yeah,
not saying you're like Mr. Comics
yeah.
journalist, but you have a pretty wide
Well, I mean, it runs for a
knowledge of,
couple of years, obviously, and it clearly can't have been a massive
yeah.
success at the
No, no,
time, right?
but you hadn't heard of it, right? So that says something,
No, or if I had it, it was in passing, and it wasn't
right?
important enough to store away in my file of facts of nonsense. But I will say, so Sergio Aragonés, however, is somebody who a lot of people who I really admire.
Right.
I've never fully gotten it, but the fact that they're so, because I've just been actually following a conversation between Gareth Gowden and Robin Bougie on Facebook, where they've been waxing rhapsodic about Aragonés and
Okay.
specifically about Brew.
Did Plop come up at all? You should ask
Plop,
them about
no, I
Plop.
know Plop did, but I should send them both a message and say,
Yeah,
hey,
yeah.
can I get your thoughts on Plop, and we can append them to another episode.
I'll send them
Uh,
the link to this when it goes up.
yeah. But they are huge fans of, and so they would strongly recommend that Brew is like, high watermark for kind of comedy comics and just
Yeah,
also an extremely long form. It's
yeah.
been running for
The only
like
thing that puts me off that is
ever.
it's the comic style is it's not bad, but it's
Hmm.
not to my taste. Do you know what I mean? It's got that kind of I don't know what you'd call it, but that kind of very child friendly. I don't know. Something.
There is something more Beano-esque about it,
Yeah.
and very loose. I mean, Aragonés is famous. Part of the reason he produces so quickly is because he has it's very confident, but it's also very loose.
You've
right?
heard it here first. Nick said Sergio Aragonés can't draw.
I did not say anything of the sorts. But
He
yeah,
told me off air. He said that.
I grew up reading his stuff again in the marginalia in Mad.
Yes.
So I mean, I've been aware of him my whole life, right? I think
Yeah.
as a comics reader, he's just on your radar. But the other thing that was weirder for me actually was I didn't know that they had ported that character like Abel, Cain, and Eve over from the House of Secrets and the House of Mystery.
Right.
So they were the hosts of a more direct kind of EC comic ripoff.
Yes, I vaguely they were kind of familiar to me because I am.
That's where Swamp Thing
gave me a. I think you gave me a
maybe
of House
because the first ever appearance of Swamp Thing by Wrightson and Len Wein or whatever that appeared in that and before it was spun off, and then those characters were then used again. They were kind of retired for quite a while, and then Neil Gaiman pulled them out of like mothballs, and they were regularly appearing in Sandman.
Okay.
I first saw them, and he kind of retooled them and made them more adult and kind of like leaned into the I mean, he was playing a lot with the whole idea of like the meta narrative side of DC, so he deliberately picked characters.
Neil Gaiman taking some ideas from elsewhere and then just polishing them a bit and updating them, and everyone saying, "Oh my God, you're a genius, Neil." That can't be right.
No, that's right. I mean, actually the most surprising thing for me about him was not when I read like Lovecraft and stuff, which is obviously an inspiration on some of his stuff, but when I read Dunsany.
Yeah.
And that one I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
But you know, he's
not a full on dig at Neil Gaiman, because I do.
No, I like a lot of that stuff.
But let's just say
I'm sure he would acknowledge his
influence. No, he would. I think it's more his fandom. I think we're having a go at than him.
Yes, yeah.
It's
but
like
anyway,
Alan Moore fandom as well, right? It's like similar territory. Fans, get your act together.
Yes, yeah. So for me, it was just weird to see those characters being used in an absolutely kind of comedic way, right? I'd only seen them either in this more horror comic thing or in Neil Gaiman. So I wasn't aware that they had also been the horror hosts of a pretty much straight up like gag comic thing.
Right.
But I really think the later issues get harder for me because they become more just broad comedy.
Right.
And less of the horror trappings that there are
as well. They feel a little bit like experiments in like just how many gags can you milk out of some people hanging from a wall?
Yes.
Like and unfortunately we're privy to all the results as opposed to the cherry picked good ones, right?
But I also
good every now and again.
Yes.
There's a lot of dross.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. I also think if you look at a lot of those comics, they have a little ZA something and then the number. They were produced for another comic, something called Zany. And then Zany was apparently cancelled, and then instead they just took a bunch of this stuff and used it for this. They feel like a bit of a dog's breakfast.
They might have been reused again as well, actually, because they seemed very
from Europe.
Yeah, because there was a British, I might have mentioned it before, there was a British kind of underground comic zine, I think from the 80s or 90s, called Talking Turkey.
Okay.
Which had a lot of reprint stuff in it from the underground comics days. And they did. I felt as if I'd seen those elongated hanging people. Who drew them actually? Do you know? Because that's a very familiar style to me as well.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure. But I will say, so to cut a long story short, because we don't have a lot of time, I would have any one of those Basil Wolvertons on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Every single cover, and I said, go look through them all because they get weird and more sketchy.
I'll
some
definitely
other
do.
ones.
I wonder, but I wonder if they also might exist. I don't know if, because we did do a Basil Wolverton collection at some point, but I don't know if Basil Wolverton's ever had like the crumb, like absolutely everything's been collected. I'm not sure.
Yes.
They may only exist in this form for the time being.
Mhm.
But yeah, no, definitely worth checking out. Do a Google search, maybe Basil Wolverton Plop, and that's probably the
Mhm.
best of it, right?
I would think so. Yeah, that's all.
Uh,
That's probably maybe all you need.
yeah, so I guess we'll plop out of here. It's a, that's something.
That's about as
Yeah.
funny as anything that's in the actual pages.
Right, that's your lot this time. That's all we got.
Yeah, sorry.
On your bike, pop it, jog on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.